Now let's talk to Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, as advertised earlier on. I've got a glittering cast in the studio. Tom Newton-Dunn, our chief political commentator, is listening in too, and so is Ross Kempsell, our all-purpose brain and specialist in all manner of specialist subjects. We can listen together to Priti Patel, who I'll welcome to the programme now. Good afternoon, Priti.
Good afternoon, John. How are you? How are
I'm
you
very well.
keeping
Thanks for
today?
making time to come and talk to us on the show. Pretty. Let me just start with the big story today, the one that we're focusing on so strongly on the program today. The Hong Kong announcement from the Foreign Secretary Dominic
Hmm.
Raab after the Prime Minister spoke as well. There's this offer from the government, which is a pretty big offer of access to this country for maybe 2.9 million Hong Kong British overseas passport holders. I mean, do you, in your office, with all the advice that you've got around you, do you have any notion of how many people in Hong Kong might conceivably take up such an offer?
Well, John, I think first of all, if I can put some context around this is not something that we've just announced today.
Sure.
I myself have been working on this particular policy approach with the Foreign Secretary and across government literally since last September, October time.
Yes.
Because if you recall, we saw just appalling levels of violence in Hong Kong. We were incredibly concerned, obviously, about a potential breach of the Sino-British Joint Declaration. And so we had put in various measures. It could have been a trigger point for people coming over. And I think it's fair to say we have seen over a gradual period of time, increases of people from Hong Kong expressing interest to come over, particularly those who are BNO citizens.
Sure.
In terms of numbers, we don't know because, quite frankly, anything could happen, and of course, it very much doesn't just come down to people coming to the UK. Other countries, in particular, I know that I've had discussions as the Foreign Secretary with some of our international counterparts, Five Eyes colleagues as
Yeah.
well, who also know that they will have people, citizens from Hong Kong, that will want to go to other countries too.
Yeah.
But I think, look, the most important thing right now is that at a time of crisis in Hong Kong, and with the Chinese government in breach of the joint declaration, we're not going to look the other way at all. We have a responsibility to the people in Hong Kong, and it's something that we stand by. And both
Yeah.
the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have been very clear about
Which is
that.
why I say that it is a big gesture. It is a big moment. As you said, the Five Eyes countries, countries like New Zealand, Australia, Canada, they could all be involved. You've been talking to them. It may be, if
Mm.
it comes to it, that they could open their doors to some of the Hong Kong citizens we're talking about as well. But given the numbers we're talking about, you could still see a very significant influx into this country, and you are very much aboard with it. Pretty, and you are famous for being, well, pretty tough on the question of border control. You are a hawk when it comes to immigration, and you'll take no offence at me describing you in that way, will you?
Well, I think first of all, I've been clear about this, and look, even before I became Home Secretary, I was on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, obviously following China's behaviour in Hong Kong and looking at obviously the wider implications. The fact of the matter is, we have a relationship, we have an obligation, and we're very clear about that. And it is the UK has a historic and moral obligation to BNOs in Hong Kong, and we want to honour that commitment. So, as I've said, we've been working on this for some time. It is the right thing to do. And in terms of people coming over here, I actually think, and I have said this both publicly and also in the discussions in government, as have others, I think the Foreign Secretary has as well.
Yeah,
I think for our country, this is one of those landmark moments when you think about our place in the world,
yeah.
how we are open to people that are being persecuted, people that are suffering great harm at the hands of others. We've always been a welcoming
Mm.
country. And, I look back to my own family's roots and origins in the United Kingdom, East African Asians, when they came over, when they were fleeing persecution, that is absolutely consistent with the obligations we have, actually our responsibilities, but also demonstrates the values that we have in our country
Mm.
and the way in which we treat those who could and are fleeing
Yeah.
persecution.
And just clear something up for us, because it wasn't clear earlier on in the House of Commons from Dominic Raab's statement or the subsequent questions. The door has been opened to British national overseas passport holders. Does that include their families, their wives and their children? Just a
Yes,
clear
it
yes or no.
will. It
Yes, it will.
absolutely, and this is we are creating. I should just say we are creating a bespoke route, and this is really important because it's not. It's just not a sort of general route at all. It's a bespoke route after a period of time. So it creates a pathway basically for people to come to the UK. work, and then obviously apply for
Yes.
citizenship. And that'll be over a period of time. The details of this, John, will come out in due course.
Yeah, I mean, just the statement as it's been made, we felt, because I want to move on. We don't have you for very much time, Pretty, and again, thanks for coming on. It's going to make Peking, Beijing, as it is has been called for some years now. It will make Beijing furious.
Well, we've been clear though. We've said this quite publicly over, a period of time. And to be quite frank, I think the real issue will be very much with Beijing. They themselves will have to reflect upon their own actions and their own conduct. It won't just be the United Kingdom
Yeah,
responding. As I've said, other countries, other nations are also watching what is going on with a degree of horror, I think it's fair to say. And other countries will feel equally the same, and very strongly too.
yeah. I mean, how does this square? I completely get your argument and your point that it is an issue of principle. But a statement like this, how does this square with your ambition, which you have cherished, of bringing down the level of migration into this country?
Well, I think it's all about controls that we have around our borders and also
Mm.
our long-term immigration
But you could be talking
policy.
about hundreds of thousands of people. I don't see you can say you're sticking to that target and then announce this.
So this isn't about targets at all. I think our long-term ambition and aspiration for our country, as we've just had the immigration bill passed through the House of Commons stage yesterday in Parliament. First and foremost, we are going to end free movement, and the bill does that. But this is about two particular areas. One is border control in
Yeah,
a way in which we have not had controls of our borders previously. There's a lot of work that's taken place around border measures, border controls, and that is very important. The second point is about our aspiration as to how we want to be around immigration in the future. We are introducing a points-based system. That points-based system brings in new controls and not the free-for-all that we've seen or discrimination that we've seen in the past where it comes to EU countries and countries from the rest of the world.
mm,
So we're making fundamental changes. We're also speaking very clearly about the quality, the people coming to our country that have something to offer, being skills-based, ending, bringing in greater controls around criminality checks,
yes,
for example, and effectively ending, yes, free movement, but many of the porous ways in which
yeah.
people have been coming to our country through our
Yeah.
borders,
Are you
through
confident,
quite
Pretty? Are you are
spurious
you
routes in
are
the
you as
past.
confident as you'd like to be that an announcement like this, made for reasons of principle that you set out, that it will go down well with many people out there who voted Conservative at the last election, many of them also supporters of Brexit, and who were
Mm.
motivated by a desire to clamp down on immigration? Are you storing up a problem for yourself on that front, possibly?
I, I don't think so. No, on the basis that I mean, this is an important. The approach that we're taking speaks more to our values as to who we are, our country, our values that we hold,
Mm.
and obviously our obligations. So I think that is definitely that's the first point that I would make. I think the second point in terms of the British public, we are bringing in controls. So ending free movement, taking back control, as you've heard me repeatedly say many times previously
Mm.
when it comes to border control and immigration. That's absolutely vital. And I think, the British public, I understand that, a huge percentage of the public absolutely think that when it comes to Hong Kong, this is the right thing to do.
Yeah. So you hope
But
you
also,
believe you're going to have
but
the public
also,
behind you
John,
as well
the other
as
point to make is we are bringing in greater checks, changing our
yeah.
policies, bringing in criminality checks at our borders, which simply have not existed in the
Mm.
past. That is part of the approach that this government has taken, and I think that's really important when
Okay.
it comes to giving the British public confidence around border security and border control.
Okay, we have to see, of course, how this is going to play out. I need to move on because time is pressing. The weekend is coming, and with it, a significant step on the road to, well, closer at least to normality as lockdown restrictions are lifted. We're going to see pubs and so on opening. Now, the police, very much a part of your responsibility. They're not going
Mm.
to go touring pubs, measuring the spaces between drinkers and tables, obviously. But we have seen just last weekend, we've seen street parties, some in some places in London, especially so-called block parties, and there's been a problem. There has been ugly violence in places, including London. So, looking at it as Home Secretary, do you say the police should step in, or should they back off for the sake of avoiding violence? Because there's been an enormous controversy about this.
Well, I think first of all, throughout coronavirus, which has lasted obviously lockdown and all the other measures that have been brought in, the police have responded to what has been an unprecedented challenge throughout this crisis, and they have done an amazing job. They really have. The frontline police officers have been heroes. Um, but sadly, and I say this really with a heavy heart, we have seen in recent weeks just violence towards our police officers, which is appalling and
Mm,
thoroughly unacceptable. And I spend a lot of time with the police. They are the very best of us. And, they run towards danger to keep the rest of us safe. And I think when it comes now to whether it's this weekend or, even over the last 6 weeks or so, as we've seen more relaxations and easements across society, it's important that the public take a responsible position, that they're
yeah.
conscientious, they follow the social distancing measures. And of course, this weekend, I mean, I would urge everybody to just be very cautious,
Mm,
stay alert, look at what we've seen sadly in other parts of the country with where the virus has, gone up again. And
yeah.
I've spent nearly every single week, John, whether it's on public media, press conferences, interviews, reminding the public that we are living with this virus. We are
Mm.
not out of the woods.
But is it right,
This is
Pretty?
our new
Is it right?
normal, effectively,
Are you
social
sure?
distancing.
But are you completely content to see police retreating, backing away from some of these scenes in the streets that we've seen, where it's got rather nasty? Is it right to back away in that way? Is discretion sometimes the better part of law enforcement? Because some people think, look, the police should be going in there and breaking this up and sorting it out.
Well,
You
well,
take
look,
a different view?
yes. No, well, first of all, I think let me just be clear about policing. When it comes to policing, the police are obviously operationally
Of
independent,
course.
and it's important, just to recognise that ministers don't have the power to direct or control those operation
But just
activities.
just in overall
But
principle,
but when it comes to obviously criminality, violence, disorder, the police should absolutely be front and centre at law enforcement and making sure that those that are participating in violence, vandalism, or disorderly behaviour, are absolutely being subject to law enforcement. There is no excuse for that whatsoever. And the same applies to these street parties. We saw some ugly scenes last week in Brixton.
yeah,
We saw sheer thuggery. There were arrests. I know that there were arrests. There were police investigations that followed, and that's absolutely right. But I do think, quite frankly, where people are so publicly and flagrantly breaching the social distancing guidelines, gathering in mass gatherings,
yes,
that is completely doing a great deal of harm when it comes to public health, undermining the public health message in local communities.
yeah.
And actually, I do also think the majority of the public just don't support that
Mm.
action.
Look,
And it's right
of
that the
course you
police
say
go
that,
in and
Pretty.
absolutely break up those
Yeah.
gatherings
You do
and
think they should break up those
prevent the disorder
gatherings?
that we've been seeing.
Yeah, you do think they should break up those parties because that wasn't quite what we've seen in some
Absolutely,
places.
I do. And particularly, I mean, these aren't sort of quiet parties. These parties basically have had hundreds of people gathering, doing very little to contain the spread of the virus. Actually, it's just spreading the virus. But also, we've seen violence, vandalism, and disorder and
Okay.
disorderly behaviour. And it's for the police to absolutely crack down on
Yeah.
those who are flouting those
Okay.
restrictions.
That's very, very clear and pretty strong advice from a Home Secretary. Although you do qualify it by saying that the police are in charge of their own operational decisions, but that's a very clear statement of fact. And were that to be the way the thing is handled over the weekend, we can easily imagine it may not go well everywhere. I'm going to touch something else, which is again in your intro. And if you have to run away, we understand that. But let me just try this while I have you. You are the Home Secretary or the political boss of MI5, the security service. National security is one of your biggest, is one of your most important responsibilities. And I assume you feel exactly that way. Do you think it's important, Priti, that when the government needs expert advice on national security, it should be able to get that expert advice from an expert?
Well, I think first of all, we have many, many brilliant and outstanding experts across our security and intelligence services. And I spend virtually, John, a part of my day every day speaking to many of them. And they're incredible in the way in which they advise us, keep us safe, and actually give ministers like myself a great deal of support and advice on some very challenging decisions at difficult times. And let's not forget, in recent weeks, certainly in my time as Home Secretary,
Mm.
I have been through some of the most appalling incidents and attacks, ranging from Fishmongers Hall to, what we saw in Reading just 2 weeks ago. And the security services are front and centre of our national response, and they are absolutely
Yes,
outstanding.
but there can be no
Um,
dispute about that, Pretty. But you know precisely why I asked the question, because David Frost, soon to be Lord Frost, who's the government's chief Brexit advisor, is to become the national security advisor, though he has little or no experience in the field of national security. And you've heard people, well, like Lord Ricketts in the House of Lords, who himself has been a national security advisor, or Lord Kerr, John Kerr, former head of the diplomatic service, and as it were, oversaw MI6, the Foreign Intelligence Service. They say it's the wrong thing to do. You can't have someone who's not expert responsible for giving that advice. They were categoric, but you just don't buy that.
Well, I don't buy that at all. And if I may say so, when it comes to our new National Security Advisor, he's a qualified and well known diplomat.
Mm.
He has plenty of experience in that field. He's leading our EU negotiations really incredibly, if I may say so, in a very robust way. But obviously, he has the experience in terms of his own diplomatic expertise, experience through networks. It is absolutely wrong to dismiss
Mm.
David's, broad breadth of skills, his experience, and how actually that will help us, I think, going forward and complement many of the, experienced individuals that I work with on a daily basis, whether it's through MI5, MI6, but our wider network, our security and intelligence networks.
Okay, I know you've got to go. So thanks for joining us on the
It's a
programme
pleasure.
this afternoon. Hopefully we can talk again before too very long. That's Priti Patel, the Home Secretary. Now with me, as I say, Tom Newton-Dunn, and we've also got Ross Campsell. Guys, what did you make of it? Let's pick up first of all on the last thing we were discussing there, the appointment of David Frost, soon to be Lord Frost, as the National Security Advisor, someone who has not worked in the security field. He's been an ambassador in his time, and maybe more importantly, he's been the government's Brexit negotiator. This isn't going to go away, is it? It is a departure from what we used to think of as normal, Tom.
Yes, it is. The appointment of the National Security Advisor, there's been 3 or 4 so far. David Cameron invented the position. Has always been a very senior Mandarin, a very senior former ambassador or some sort, normally out of the Foreign Office. So David Frost fits that bill. He was formerly an ambassador, but some while ago, and was last ambassador to Denmark before he went off into the private sector and then got headhunted back into government as Boris Johnson's special advisor. So he hasn't had that breadth of experience before. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? And this is what the argument's all about. The grandees, Peter Ricketts, a former NSA. You heard Theresa May yesterday fuming about it, saying this guy just doesn't have the security experience. Therefore, he's not going to be the man qualified to make those massive life or death judgments, because that's what security is. Boris Johnson's camp, remember, Priti Patel is a really important member of Team Boris. She was there from the outset of his campaign. They're very thick together. She's very much on the inside track and deeply trusted by number 10. And so is David Frost. This is a very tight-knit gang running the country. And they would say, we need one of our own in there. We need to do a lot to the country. We need to shake it up, turn it upside down. Unless we can have someone we implicitly trust who gets it, then we're not going to be achieve what we want to do.
It's more than, I'll get Ross's take in a second too. It's more than just an argument about nuts and bolts of the government machine, or for that matter, the security machine. This does touch on principle for an awful lot of people. You Tom, you spent in a previous incarnation spending a lot of time talking to top brass in the military and in the security infrastructure of the country. What are you picking up from there? It's not just a political row. You're picking up some unhappy sounds, I'm guessing.
Yeah, there is disquiet. The security defence establishment, because I suppose there is one, they're not best pleased about this. And I think if you look down the ages, the last 10, 20 years, Britain's more recent history, there are quite a few examples of senior civil servants, senior generals, senior people in the MOD saying to governments, Tory and Labour, when asked, can we do this? Can we do Iraq? Can we do Afghanistan? Whatever it is. And these senior military figures saying, yes, we can, Prime Minister. We'll make it happen for you.
Yeah.
And the truth is, as we all now know, actually they couldn't make it happen. And that's why having someone able to speak truth to power in that position, I think the establishment, the securocrats think is really important. Now, maybe David Frost is more qualified to do that than an ambitious general who wants a peerage. Who knows?
Yeah, I'm going to move on because it's too easy for the likes of us to get obsessed with the inner workings of SW1 and the government machine. But as we say, it's a pretty hot topic in these parts. Ross, we started off with Priti Patel. That's talking about the news from Hong Kong, the government's positioning on Hong Kong. It was a curious thing, wasn't it? This is she doesn't shun the label of an immigration hawk. Very happy to open the doors in the way that she has. And she said, I think for the first time, Tom, didn't she, that this offer to British national overseas passport holders extends to families as well. So, you're looking at maybe an even larger number of people invited to come to this country than we'd originally anticipated. And she was perfectly relaxed about that. So it's about making a great big statement as Britain tries to recast itself on the world stage.
It's a classic example of the tension between numbers and the moral dimension of policy in immigration policy. So the Home Secretary there saying, as you said, I think for the first time, that families would also be allowed under these measures. The government will have an internal estimate as to how many people it will believe will enter the United Kingdom.
It can only be a contingency, though. There's no knowing.
On this basis, they will work on an estimate. That estimate won't be public, but there will be a tension between the sheer number of immigrants that you're talking about, or people coming to the UK, and of course the government's wider immigration policy, as you rightly pointed out during your interview. We know that the government is in shedding policy responsibilities through coronavirus and beginning to really focus and laser down on what can actually be delivered in this Parliament. Don't forget that 6 months of Parliament at least has been frustrated both by Brexit, the general election, and then coronavirus. Parliamentary time is at an absolute premium. So introducing the new immigration system, that priority will definitely throw this into some contrast.
Yeah. Let's have a word, while we can, about another aspect of our conversation. All too brief, as these conversations always are when you get a minister on the line like that. But a big weekend coming up in the story of the lockdown. We're going to see a significant loosening of the ties that bind, and we're going to see restaurants and pubs opening under supposedly strictly controlled conditions. And there was Priti Patel saying, when it comes to those street parties, those block parties, which got such enormous attention last week because there was a certain amount of violence as the police were stepping into those events, she was saying, look, you've got to get in and break them up. That seems to be what she was saying. She was pretty hawkish on that too.
It is absolutely for the police to crack down on those things, were her precise words. And look, the police are going to have a very busy Saturday afternoon. I think we all know that. The pubs reopening, restaurants reopening. It's going to be hard going. It is when the police operation is simply unable, at the strength of numbers, they are hugely outnumbered in some of these sort of raves. And if they've got to sort out trouble outside every pub on every street, that's when the police start running into trouble. And that's when the police, for their own safety, start backing off. And that's when politicians, when those pictures are relayed on TV cameras and talked about on radio stations, that's when politicians get upset with them.
Certainly on the point of policing the imminent lifting of the lockdown in England on Saturday night, I was speaking to sources in several police federations in England today who had two questions really. The first was, are you going to give us any more money to allow us to police this in the way that they deem necessary? And the second really was, can we expect this to last? If there are local and regional lockdowns, which after Leicester look as if they will be a reality, that changes the policing picture yet again. And some of the measures that are on the table across England include the use of mutual aid, which is where police forces, territorial police forces, help one another across county boundaries. Also the idea of diverting resources away from neighbourhood policing to public order. These are the kind of operational decisions that police commanders will be making this weekend. A police source told me earlier today that it looks like a super Saturday in the sense it looks like a New Year's Eve celebration. That's the kind of planning that's going on. We know similar planning in A&E departments across England, and the question that I was asked is, why is this happening on a Saturday when public services in general are under more of a weekend stretch scenario in any case? Okay,
can we just, before we close this conversation, just indulge in a little bit of political gossip, Tom? You've been getting whispers out of the political cabinet, as it's called. That's when the cabinet gets together, officials are sent out of the room, and people just sort of slightly let their hair down, and occasionally, well, they don't often, but they let rip. And on this occasion, well, you've got a story of exactly that.
Yes. So the Prime Minister set a bit of a rabbit running a few weeks ago when he said the word reshuffle at the dispatch box. I think it was in the middle of a bit of heated PMQs. That got everyone a bit flapping. He's moving, in fact, he's closing down the Department of International Development, and he's promised the Development Secretary, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, a new job in the Cabinet. So the Cabinet a bit upset. And I learned the Prime Minister was confronted by a member of the Cabinet in the middle of this meeting the other day with everyone else around the table, who said, Prime Minister, this was Therese Coffey, the Work and Pension Secretary.
Yeah, one of the more junior members.
One of the more junior, but she's come in for a little bit of stick herself. She had an unnecessary Twitter spat with Marcus Rashford. And she said, Prime Minister, we have to stop these rumours. It's really destabilising. Every time number 10 people start talking about reshuffles, all my civil servants put their pens down and they stop working for me because they think someone else is about to arrive, have to work for. To which Boris Johnson took this on the chin and said, absolutely, believe me, it's the last thing on my mind at the moment. So there you have
at
it.
At that precise moment, yeah.
I think the Cabinet, and they were, of course, egging on, as I understand it, Therese Coffey to confront him. Go on, you ask him. But Therese Coffey did, and she got the answer she wanted from the Prime Minister. There is to be no reshuffle this summer. So let's see if that one comes to pass.
So you accept that. Okay, so we'll see if there's any reshuffle this summer or not. It may be that a few weeks down the line we forget this conversation altogether as we're busily reporting a reshuffle. But it was interesting, though, I guess, wasn't it, to see that dynamic, to see there's a Cabinet Minister at the Cabinet table, you say with the moral support, I don't know if people spoke up on that occasion, but the moral support of Cabinet colleagues trying to get the Prime Minister to back off and stop some of this sort of semi-public musing about their futures.
I think it's what her colleagues would describe as a very bold decision, Minister. But suddenly I was relayed by someone else in the room who was very pleased indeed that she asked this, because they also wanted to know. But it's interesting, we do these lovely speculations and we love to get into all this. But our chatter, the Prime Minister's chatter, number 10 briefings, has a real effect on these ministers' jobs. And the civil service simply clam up and stop delivering if they think there's about to be another merry-go-round.
Okay, I've got to wind this up, guys. Ross Campsell, Tom Newton-Dunn, thanks very much indeed for coming in and having a natter. We will do it again. I think I can more or less guarantee. This is Drive on Times Radio. I'm John Pienaar.